kind of a continuation of the last session that was about the EUDR, which is the EU Deforestation Regulation. And this is particularly focused on the commodity mapping aspect and what's current, what's needed, and what's coming. Similar to last hour, we're going to have a panel of experts to talk about different aspects of this tech problem. We'll hear from them, and then we'll have a panel discussion. So if you weren't here before, what is the EUDR and why are we talking about it? So starting in December of 2024, companies that sell goods into the European Union are required to prove that these goods were not grown on land deforested after December 31st of 2020. There's 7 commodities that are impacted, and so this talk is going to focus on the mapping of those 7 commodities in relation to the EUDR. And again, this particular session will have hearing from the experts that we have, a panel discussion, and time for audience questions. So without further ado, David, come on up.
Thank you. So to try to figure out how to get the conversation started, I thought the first thing we could do is, how hard is this stuff to map, right? It's hard, right? First problem, like when you look at something like oil palms, the fine texture of those patterns they're challenging, right? And the solution is typically use high resolution imagery, use alternative sensors, something like Saah, use machine learning algorithms, get better field-based information. And then you get into something like soy, and you get this annual crop, and it gets confused with a bunch of other crops. How many of you guys have seen that? That happens, right? Solution with that is get some better measures of phenology, potentially. And then you get into a situation where you're trying to map cattle. That's more like a land use sort of thing, where the way people actually range their cattle on that property, their style of doing that's going to dictate the pattern. So you need to understand a little bit about that management activity type. And it could look like grass and tree cover. There's a whole bunch of different factors that roll into it. So idea here is to take advantage of time series analysis and get a fundamental understanding of how those management activities are working in that specific geography, right? That takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort, right? Then you get into something like cacao and coffee. This stuff's under trees, right? And this is a nice little visual to kind of show you the complexity of this stuff, where it gets really hard to identify things that are under other things, right? And so there's, again, time series analysis, deep learning pattern recognition analysis. Fundamental to all of it is having local knowledge of what those patterns actually look like, so you could actually deploy a solution. And then when you start getting into things like wood and rubber, right? Like if you talk about rubber in general, it looks like natural regeneration. And again, this is another one of these things where it's the same sort of pattern, same sort of generalized solution, but it's a specific sort of application, again, driven by local knowledge, local understanding, and the need for us as a community to be able to integrate that in some sort of sustainable and meaningful way. I'm going to hand this off.
I'll do my best to keep this 5 minutes, but it's a little bit different than mapping exactly the commodity, the land use. So what we do in Trase is really to map the supply chain. So what we do, and I hope this works. Oh, that's very unexpected. So what we do is really to map the supply chain by the place of production, going through the importer and exporter to the place of destination. If you can see in this chart that we call Sunky, quite fancy one, not super easy to navigate though, we can see, for example, different things associated to these flows, like the zero deforestation commitments that are assumed by the companies, but also some different things like the soil deforestation exposure, emission, and so on. What's so nice about that is because this type of mapping of commodity supply chain gives us 2 different perspectives of the supply chain. The first one is the external market. For that, we use basically per shipment data. So we're talking about custom declarations and bills of lading. Most of them, you can just buy this data, and it's very data-driven. But we also have the other part of it, and it's the domestic market and impact. And that's the beautiful part where spatial data is extremely important, not only for us to know what is the impact of this commodity production, production, but also to know where is located the first point of aggregation of the commodity. This is what we call the facilities or logistic hubs. There are three very important concepts associated to the EU due diligence, the EU Deforestation Regulation. So we talk about legality and cutoff dates, and it's important because I think it was Tasso who mentioned before that 74% of deforestation potentially legal happening in the properties are not detected in the overlap between land use and deforestation, which means that you see clearly the blind spot that can be created if you're not considering the whole location of the property. The second one is what we call the allocation period in Trase, and it's mapped there in how we really consider that this is deforestation driven by the commodity. And this gives us the idea that in a very conservative scenario, the EUDR will be able to promote this zero deforestation supply chain only in 2026. And the reason for that is deforestation happening in 2020, in 2019, and in 2018. It's traded after 2020, they are linked to deforestation. So products that are traded in 2024 are the ones guiding the deforestation or driving deforestation. So it's take a little bit longer for the commodity to really reduce and show these intentions of the due diligences. Very recently, Trase engaged in the supply chain data partnership, and it's for us to be able to really map the location of these facilities. So the silos, the crushing facilities, the refineries, mills, and the slaughterhouses. And fast forward a little bit on the detection of these facilities, this allows us to do other types of mapping, which is the commodity supply chain at scale or at the property level. This is a really good representation of the beef supply chain, and we know that and I was really bored in the sector going all different countries, municipalities, that's a little bit too much, municipalities in Brazil to buy cattle with my grandfather, and they really travel through different states, different municipalities during the life cycle, which creates this concept of not only direct suppliers, but also indirect suppliers that give different exposures to the slaughterhouses, but also consumers. Another important concept that we have in the EU due diligence is the importance of the undesirable effects of that or leakage. That's possible, especially in some commodities where this can be really manifested inside the domestic supply chain. This is an app we have in Brazil that gives consumers the information about their supply chain, that gives the information about the beef that they are purchasing. But when they are doing that, they connect to the suppliers, to the facilities, giving people not only the ability to decide for better products, but also giving us the first full traceability until the consumers. And then we can see and we can engage with companies that are trading directly with the slaughterhouses. So this is a little bit beyond commodity mapping to show us how we can really map the supply chains and what is the importance of having spatial data for us to understand the configuration of the supply chains. That's it.
Hello, everyone. If you were in the earlier session, you might have heard Remy talk a bit about the Forest Data Partnership. So I wanted to give just a brief introduction into some of the data that we're working with and the products we're working to create. And then Nick will actually be going into some more detail as well in this session about that. So the Forest Data Partnership, we don't want to just create another data layer and put it out there to compete with everything else. If you were in the earlier session, a few people mentioned there's a lot of different data products out there. A lot of people are working on mapping these commodities, but how do you know what to use? So one of the goals of the Forest Data Partnership is to combine what's already out there, and how do we do that in an effective way where we can use the best available science as well as remote sensing inputs to create maps that outperform any one of them in particular and make that all available publicly, both the outputs as well as the models themselves for people to use and tweak. I just wanted to stress that this type of mapping, this should really be an iterative approach. We don't want to just push out a layer and say this is the best, it can't be improved. We know, especially when you look at global products, that they don't perform well locally. So we know that people need to be able to improve upon these data sets. Let's say you are in a producing country and you know that the map is not performing in your region. You should be able to provide data into the system for that to be improved. And this is really a way where Servier, the organization I work with, fits well into the Forest Data Partnership with our global network of partners that have local knowledge of the land and technical expertise to really assist us in this process. So I wanted to focus kind of on how we would add this reference data into the system and how would we get at validating, which is kind of the next step for us in the Forest Data Partnership. So you can think of ground measurements, but we can do that with high-resolution satellite imagery for many of these commodities. So you saw a lot of different images of commodities when David was talking, and some of these things like oil palm, we can tell just from high-resolution imagery where they are, and they can be manually digitized. And one way we can do this is with a platform like Collect Earth Online, which is really easy to integrate with Google Earth Engine and in our kind of Google tech stack. You can look at high-resolution imagery, you can design a survey to answer questions, and even see like some time series components as well to help with your interpretation. But then if we think about like real on-the-ground measurements, there's certain commodities, and this came up a lot in the previous section, like cocoa or coffee that are grown in the shade, and it's really difficult, even from high-resolution imagery. You can see on the bottom right there, in Ghana, it's smallholder-driven systems and cocoa, and these were digitized in the field. But when you look at a very high-resolution image, it's very hard to tell why is that field different even from the one right next to it. So these are things you can't always do with high-resolution imagery versus, the top image you can see there's industrial palm, there's industrial rubber, there's some smallholder, but it's a very different system than this cocoa. So we really need to be out on the ground. And, the ground application, which some of you may have heard about at Geo4Good already, is one way in which you can do this and that we plan to use in partnership with our Servier hubs and other partners to accelerate this ground data collection. And then I think there's a lot of interesting other data sets we can think about. How do we kind of scale this up and use all the available data we can find? There's a lot of unique data sets out there. I'm a big fan of the Awesome GE Community Catalog, and recently they put on open aerial maps, so we can have openly accessible drone imagery. I just have been looking through it. There's some over Indonesia. It's time-stamped and very high resolution. So these are other options. We can explore really interesting data sets, and there's really more data every day. And then just wanted to end on how do you relate to the Forest Data Partnership? What can you get from it? Maybe what can you give to it, ideally? There's all these different, we have these map products, but it's really about the process as well. So we have data that we've collected through our own networks of the core partners of the Forest Data Partnership and outside of it. But we know that a lot of people out there have their own data as well. So submitting data into this system that we have, and Nick will talk a bit about like the meta-learner model and the ensemble machine learning models. Adding more data will always help us to have a better understanding of how we're doing with this mapping. And there's even interesting new ways where if you're very concerned about publicly sharing that data, that you can feed the model in a closed setting where you don't actually need to share the data with anyone else. But it will still lead to improvements in the model, and you can, see how your own data sets are performing, since we have heard about the problem of everyone having their own map that they check against and they say, I'm good, but we really want to bring visibility, transparency to this issue, because a lot of the talk I've been hearing around it, it's not even really a remote sensing problem in most cases. There are those interesting challenges like cocoa and coffee that are shade grown, but it's really a transparency challenge and an interoperability challenge of how do we bring all these data sets together and allow them to talk in different ways. Thank you.
Well, guys, hello. I'm José. I'm from the Nature Conservancy. I am here to present to you the Digitais da Floresta project. I want to ask people that work in this project to raise their hands, because there's a lot of people here that work with this effort with us. And basically, this is a fighting. We are fighting against illegal logging and deforestation over at the Amazon biome. So we work with the Google.org. We work with the Nature Conservancy, obviously. The USP, the University of São Paulo, also have helped us in this project. Also Imaflora, and also Trase that joined this initiative to work and try to address some problems that we face over Amazon. So here, briefly, I will try to explain a very complex understanding about the science topic, but basically, we are talking about isotopes. So imagine that a tree, during their lifetimes, they can absorb air, soil, and water. And as a result, we call it, we have an elemental signature of the tree. And imagine, if you have a forest, you have various trees, and you can build something like isoscape. So it's something like a footprint of the tree. So this kind of footprint can help us to address some kind of relationship with origin. So here, I will talk with you about collecting data. To collect, you have to collect samples and process these samples. And we are using information available on Google Earth Engine, and Google Earth Engines and Google engineers helped us to develop this kind of effort. And considering a lot of data sets, we generate the isoscapes and have the current methods, but the Google.org engineers helped us to create an innovative method that we can create isoscapes and we can leverage this kind of data, this kind of problem. So imagine that you have to verify the origin of a sample, and you create some kind of a statistical way to validate or to address this kind of origin. So you can work in trying to detect fraud. So we have a no location about this, the timber origin, and you have a paperwork, and you can start to trying to understand and overlapping this information and trying to identify the problem and check what people are saying, what they are saying to you, and what the reality is. This is the question. And so in this initiative, we created the Timber ID. Timber ID basically is a web application, and you can start using this kind of origin verification. So you can use this kind of functionality internally. And then you can also use it as a timber sample management. So it can be used as a database. And basically, you are using Google. So Google technology, Google framework. Basically, we are using everything integrated internally. Google Cloud, Google Earth Engine, everything from Google. Thank you. And considering this kind of and considering this kind of initiative, we are using basically everything that Google provided to us to create in this project to enhance this capability. So data sets, extensibility, authorization, storage, we are using Firestore. We know basically we know everyone in Google that works in this specific part of components right now, so we can move on. And they are helping us, they are working with us, and we have some solution using this technology and using this framework. And where we are going to the future? How you guys can help us to enhance this project or to work on it with us? Basically, right now, we are trying to improve the origin verification capabilities. So the research part is very important. So we will also continue developing the science behind the map, the isoscapes. So better isoscapes, additional isoscapes using chemical elementary analysis, using hydrogen, using other sources, and uses isoscape more effectively. So analyzing things, and Ruben, please, you're the guy that created a lot of things here that we can improve and we can advance the isoscapes, because the research part is very important to create this kind of verification. And we are also thinking about collaborating and scale impact, because the question here is we don't want to create it by only by TNC. We think that Trase and Imaflora and the other partners, you can help us to develop this project. This project works like some kind of independent validation that you can work with using isotope and create some kind of validation to our samples to the reality. So it's very important to create some kind of independent validation using a very, very robust science behind it to address this problem of origin. And that's it. This is V, and thank you for your time. And this is Digitais da Floresta Anti-Variety Initiative.
All right, thank you. More stuff about the Forest Data Partnership. This is some of the early efforts of the Innovate Task Force. And so one of the first things we're interested in is just kind of, what do we have and how do we turn this into sort of a communal process where everybody can be involved at one step or another. And so you might call that a data potluck, or bring your own map, with the idea that if you bring something to share, we can all have a great feast together. And so that's the idea here. We're not going to throw anything away. We're going to incorporate it all through this sort of communal process. So we have existing maps. There might be some training data. There might be some sort of proprietary or sensitive data that could be used in modeling. And so you can think of the columns here as kind of like privacy levels or something like that, where we can take proprietary data, mix it up with our models, and make something better, possibly even do that anonymously so that you're not actually sharing the data with us, you're just letting us train a model. And then finally, maps and the data that are used to produce the maps come out the other end, and those are available to the public or stakeholders in the region. I think it's worth noting that there's sort of an AI fairness component to all this, so that if the map is wrong about your area, you should have the right to correct the record. And so that's the key part of this sort of feedback loop here, and technologies like Ground and Collect Earth Online, where you can say, hey, wait a minute, this map that you folks have produced is not quite right in my area of operations or my area of interest, and here, let me help you make it better by providing these samples or providing some more data. Okay. Here's how we implemented that set of ideas to map palm oil plantations, and this is all sort of. We started with the easiest thing, and we did it as fast as we could, just to kind of get up and running here. But the way this works is, we have plenty of existing maps of palm, and we don't want to throw those out necessarily. We want to use them in a process of harmonization to make a single good map that everybody can feel confident using. And that process is called meta prediction, or sometimes just ensemble learning or stacking. And what you need to make this work is more training data. And if you have more training data, specifically training data that wasn't used to produce any of the base maps, then you can make a harmonized map. And so that's one way you can bring your own map, and we can mix it up with the other stuff that we have and make a better one or a harmonized product. Okay, here's another one. This is a slightly different approach. This is taking a communal set of training data. So we had labeled points contributed by Google, FAO, and from the scientific literature. And we dropped those into a neural network hosted on Vertex AI, and we get a map of palm probability out the other end. I'm secretly hoping that we don't have to threshold that thing and say where is palm and where is not palm. We can use the probabilities as they are. The other thing is, as I said, if this map is wrong in some sense, then there's an opportunity to correct it. So we'll push this out. People can start using it. As we get feedback, you say, this is not quite right in my area. That's fine. Give us some data. We'll retrain the model, publish a new map. And as Jacob mentioned, that's sort of an iterative process that is not only communal, but the map is constantly being updated and getting better all the time. So that's how we're thinking about this kind of commodity mapping. And that is it from me. Thank you.
All right, so I'd like to invite all of our speakers up to these chairs. Also, there's some microphones over there you guys can grab. All right.
Check.
Oh man.
Oh boy. Oh boy.
Jesus.
You can break the chair. All right. So to start off with, beyond identifying where the commodities are grown today, producers need to know where the commodity went along the supply chain, and some commodities have very complex supply chain journeys. And what are your organizations doing to think about helping traceability through the supply chain? So Vivian, I know that's what you are doing. I was curious to hear from others if there's been any work in that area.
Should I start then? I mean,
Yeah.
I was trying to hold my horses here, but I just want to say a couple of words.
Yeah.
So, kind of like traceability is everything for us. Is the philosophy of the initiative is the beginning of everything. We're trying to now to go, and I think the first session was amazing for those who attended before. That the necessity to go now to the farm level and to really provide something that can be more actionable for these companies is extremely important. And this is what we're working now, is to get the most of the information. Because one thing that I really want to share with you all is it's just a matter to dig a little bit deeper in the papers. Most of the countries, they have a lot of different data that is not intended for traceability that can be used. The great example for that is the beef supply chain in Brazil and the GTA that was actually created for sanitary purpose, but gives a really good clue about the intensity of the trade relationships, but also how different farms are connected. One just fun fact, in the fourth connection, like you know when you go to the LinkedIn and you know someone that is a third connection, in the fourth hop, every single farm in Pará, a state in Brazil, is connected. So you see that this is a really, really interesting configuration of network.
Would anyone else like to add anything to that?
I guess that considering the timber ID and the kind of isoscape generation, I guess that we can also think about scaling it to other commodities. So it's very interesting that you can start to think about cattle, you can start to think about soybean, you can start to scale up things that you are using isoscapes to other commodities. So I guess that we created the timber ID because we have to create some deliverables in the project, but we are also thinking about the big picture, thinking about the architecture, the Google architecture that you are working here, partners that are already with us, like Trase and Imaflora. So I guess that it's a start. We are starting something. Right now we have providing some kind of guidance. We are answering something like, there is a possible path to follow. Yes, there it is, and we have to follow it together and create some kind of integration. Think about other commodities, but for me, this is just a start. This is the first project that Google helped us, and other partners joined with us. So, but I guess that everybody has to think about isoscapes, not thinking about a silver bullet that will solve everything. But if you think about database, if you think about a robust science, and you start to integrate things over territory, because basically we're talking about a geographical aspect of the problem, we can integrate things and work together to address the problem. This is my opinion.
Awesome. Anything else to add, or I'm going to change tack a little bit? Change tack. All right. So Nick told me before this he didn't want to be bored, so I'm gonna ask a little bit of a provocative question. So, do you all, as experts in this area, think that it's possible to create the information needed about these commodities and associated risks to meet the EUDR timeline? So companies are going to start to be charged, I believe, in December or January of 2025. So why or why not? And how could this community potentially help meet that challenge? Nick?
All right. I do think it's possible, but I don't think it's possible under the existing paradigm, which is very much one of competition and this sort of proliferation of different products, and you're never quite sure which one to believe, and there are disagreements in the products and that kind of thing. I think by coming together as a community and sharing our data in a transparent and open manner, and sharing our methods in a transparent and open manner, we can build those products. It's going to be challenging, and it's going to require boots on the ground, for sure. We're not going to be able to do this entirely through remote sensing or airborne imagery, anything like that. We're going to need actual observers and possibly untrained observers. People just going about their business, people who live in a specific area or who are conducting business in a specific area, contributing data in the course of their daily operations. So I think if we have those multiple feeds coming together in a secure and trustworthy environment, we can do it. But it's going to take a lot of sort of coordination and a group effort.
Can I add to that just a little? I mean,
Yes, please.
I think Nick's right on the point with that. And to extend it a little bit more, I mean, this is a public benefit. It benefits all of us, right? And then attached to that, there needs to be some agility and some willingness from all parties to learn with this process. So maybe the regulations need to be adjusted. Maybe the way some of the management structure needs to be adjusted. Maybe the way we trace things needs to be redefined. But there needs to be a process for that co-learning that Nick's talking about in some sort of rapid fashion.
I guess my question to follow up with that, do you have a suggestion of what entity or groups of entities could be that mechanism for learning or be that coalition?
So in places where I've seen these sorts of challenges before, whether they're wildfire problems or carbon problems or like any of these like major ecosystem service issues where people are engaging with the environment in a way where there's a co-need, is getting the interested parties that have the ability to make decisions in a room and then enable, right? Not a huge, massive group, but not a tiny elite group. The stakeholders that have a viable engagement process, and be realistic about it, right? Keep it open and ensure that you have all the different voices in that room. And there's a whole wide variety of examples of where that works. I mean, if you look at the Sphere networks and their consortium models and how they scale things out, it's a great example of that. If you look at what we've done with that, and we've brought some of those consortium models back to the United States to deal with the wildfire problems. I mean, we're building wildfire models right now with 18 different organizations, including the federal system, state systems, academic institutions, some private sector folks, and it's an all hands on deck, Manhattan style, like we all need to figure this out together. Where are our challenges? Let's go after this together. What are the problems that you're having with your approach? What are the problems that you're having with your approach? And let's figure them out. And that's a shift in mindset, right? We have to shift the way that we actually allocate resources to this thing, to Nick's point, right? We have to shift the way we actually collaborate and incentivize our people with our professional pathways. And it's a big lift. And things like the EU thing is great because it's going to force that conversation to help accelerate some of this stuff.
Can I just add one thing? I think it's really important also to involve consumers. So the app is the first, with this app that I presented before, the Do Pasta Prato, or the Beef app, that's the English version of it. It's basically to give the possibility for consumers to really create this last link in the supply chain that goes from the slaughterhouse to the retailers. And this is the moment that we can really understand and influence the configuration of the supply chain. So technology is there to enable people to participate and give more traceability, but also transparency to the supply chain. So I think involving consumers and really putting in a way that can be used by people that are not necessarily trained by that, exactly the point that Nick made, it's extremely important for us. Involve more the community.
Awesome. Anyone else want to add anything to that particular?
Integration is the key, I guess. We have to integrate things because we don't have to replicate things and change minor changes and replicate the solutions. I guess considering verification, considering the databases and the sources, we have to work together. This is the point.
Awesome. Another question, we've talked a lot about like the models. can you all speak to how complicated you think it will be to keep these models up to date? And Nick, I know you touched on this a little bit in your talk, but what are the things that are needed to support, accuracy and keeping things up to date? What's the role of ground truth data?
I could speak a bit to it. I think when we were talking about that iterative process, that we're really going to need continued ground data collection as well as using these different image interpretation techniques. I think as we're ingesting the best available science, that it's really the research community that will continue to push this forward, and the openness of the research community and civil society and others to share the work that they're doing to keep improving it. And as new data streams come online, when we look at things like NISAR, which might help with challenges around looking at shade-grown crops and things like that, that we just need to keep pushing and using the best available science.
Yeah, let me just add a little bit there. I mean, there's an analog that I think most of you might be familiar with is Google Maps. And Google Maps was not created 100% inside Google. It's created with quite a bit of what we call user-generated content in there. And we rely on, in addition to other methods, that content to sort of keep things fresh and up to date. And I think we need a very similar kind of model for the natural world. Specifically, the maps that we're pumping out or that, are being used by these orgs to make decisions need to be accessible and transparent to everyone. And when you notice that there's something wrong, you have the opportunity to correct the record. And there's certainly a degree of sort of breaking down the digital divide in order to do that, because a lot of folks out in the field might not have access to the latest mobile technology and that kind of thing. So I do think there's going to be an effort to sort of get that kind of technology into the hands of more people so that they can contribute to this map of the natural world.
Can I just add one thing? I wanted to cry here, but now after what you said, I'm going to be a little bit more positive. That I'm trying really hard in the third day. But one thing that is extremely important is that the traceability agenda is also the transparency agenda. And for example, in Brazil, since June 2018, we don't have a data that is called the custom declarations. And this reduces a lot our visibility on the capacity to really understand what are the actors in the supply chain. So it is also a mission for us and all the organizations to also push towards more transparency to enable us to provide solutions. Otherwise, it's really hard to keep things up to date.
I always hear these questions. Can you fix this or do you have to manage this? Right? Do you guys ever, it's like there's no solution, right? This is something that we're going to have to manage over time as all these things keep popping up. No, well, and that's also true, right? So there's going to be new technologies, new challenges, new needs for new information systems on an ongoing basis, and it's going to take a community that's willing to engage and be part of that at all the different levels, and that's hard, right?
José?
Just to add that it's very important to think about collecting samples, because imagine you are talking about Brazilian Amazon, so it's not a fair reality. There's a lot of problems, a huge void in the territory, place that you just can't go. But when you build some kind of community collaboration to collect samples with trusted partners, it also help you to maintain the science part, the research part along by working, because it's helpful, because we think about maps, but not static maps. It's a dynamic map. You have to create a new isoscape. You have to collect new samples and add it to the map and to the temporary to the solution. So collaborating, I guess, it's very important to consider this kind of map improvement, the technique improvement. So collecting samples and adding it to the iteration, creating new maps is very important to keep the isotopic effort working.
Any other feedback or any other thoughts on that one? No. Okay, great. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to the audience, because last time I don't think we had enough time for audience questions. So does anyone, Pierre?
Remy's still here if you want to ask him a question.
Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, thank you for this discussion. I have a question. So this is the EU, okay, that's a destination country now. But what can we do to get the other destination countries on board? Because it is often the very same players, let's say, which import into the EU, but they import as well into China and other countries, right? So as a geospatial community, what can we do that these players don't have a double standard, that for their imports into the EU, they're going to do all of this, but then importing into China or other countries, they will not follow.
That's a hard one, right? Because you also have problems of leakage, right? So I was like, okay, I'm gonna send all my commodity X, Y, or Z to EU because I can, and it hits all the regulations and all this other stuff that does it. I'm gonna send somewhere else. So one mechanism of dealing with is ultra transparency over the entire process, right? So that's one thing the geospatial community could do. The second thing that the geospatial community can do is link in with some of these other communities that are able to track the stuff that you can't see from space, that you need to get in the systems and help enable some of that. Third thing that our community just in general can do is show what the impacts are. Right, so maybe you can't do the tracing, and maybe you don't have the requirement, but you could highlight what the negative impacts are with those things that are slippery, like the leakage problem, and highlight that as an issue. And that goes back to like what I was saying beforehand. There's not going to be one fix on any of this stuff. It's going to be a constant management of a conversation over these resources that we need to manage intimately. Before we had the luxury of just dealing with these things at scale. Now we have to deal with things at a much finer scale just because of the challenges that we're in.
I just want to add one thing that I think it's Article 34, Paragraph 2 of the EUDR, that is the impact assessment. So in 2025, we're going to talk about what is not included in the EUDR, and it's still ongoing. So it's not only other countries, but also inside the country. What we see in the beef supply chain in Brazil is that the good quality is going to the external market, and then we have all these impacts remaining in the domestic market. So we are also talking about how countries should commit to also behave the same way that they are behaving with the European market after the agreement.
One other example you could think of is like if you look at the car market in the United States. California is pretty good at setting some pretty stringent standards on what's required to be able to drive a car in this area. And so what ends up happening is all the manufacturers are like, it's easier for us just to comply with the California rules, so we don't have to have 10 different rules. Right? You make it too expensive to have too many different systems from a variety of different. Maybe that might be something that could be looked at.
Yeah, and I would just add, as well as that, it just being difficult to have different systems, a lot of the talk around the EUDR right now is how difficult it will be to implement, but other countries can look to it as an example of how well was it implemented and can we follow that path, and there's all these organizations popping up to address how to meet the EUDR regulations, and then that should make the ecosystem simpler for other countries to follow.
Awesome.
So that's more for the Forest Data Partnership folks. So I heard about your party, like bring your own maps. I want to bring my maps because it's going to be a blast, so I'm going. But I'm a private company, so I'm paying to get the data, samples, maps, etc. So I don't really want to share it with the others. So is there a possibility that I can bring my things, keep them anonymized, or keep them hidden from the other, but still improve the model that you're building? I think this is what you were presenting, but I wasn't completely sure.
Yeah, we're working on it. The idea is that suppose you have a secret map, and you find that your secret map is in disagreement with the public map that is being produced by Forest Data Partnership or some other organization, and you say, well, we sure would like to use the public map, but, there are some important places in our secret map that we really need to have more correctly represented. You could sample. So here's what we're thinking is going to be possible here. You could sample your secret map, give us the sample. Sample your secret map. You keep your sample. We don't get the secret sample either. But a machine can read the secret sample and train a model. And that training might be retraining of the model that we already have, using the secret sample. The model is now retrained using the secret sample, which we have never seen. The map is improved in your area of interest, and now you can start using the public map with additional information from the secret map. That's sort of a outline of how this might work. I see Remy wants to add something there.
But confidential space.
It is called confidential spaces, and we are working on it.
Yeah.
I don't want to promise anything right now.
I will add to what Nick is saying with a huge caveat if we were working on it, thinking about like, is there a way to distribute the model through like TensorFlow Hub or something like that, such that you guys could pick it up, put it on your own GCP project and retrain it with your data to improve it. So we recognize that there's going to be like multiple options needed specifically for private companies who do have a significant proprietary investment into the data that they're collecting.
And so is it related in any ways with what we heard earlier in the conference about saving models as assets?
Yeah, so one of the ways that we're talking about distributing these kind of models is just as trained models, so that if you want, you can pick up the trained model and do whatever you want, retrain it or do some kind of transfer learning or whatever, but our model is still available for you to do that. That's a great point, Alicia.
I kept on thinking of Secret Santa.
I think as David said that, I don't know if his exact words, but this is a public interest, it's a public good, but for any change, there are always people that will benefit and people that will be hurt by it. And especially if you allow anonymous contributions that are hard to trace, and you open up to a very large amount of people, you have the potential problem of people gaming the system to change the map in their area so they avoid some type of negative change. So how do you balance that if you're trying to make it anonymous, but you still want to be able to verify the changes?
Yeah.
Make sure that they're in the right direction.
I think the question is, how do you weed out this sort of malicious content or maybe just bad quality content? Maybe somebody didn't understand the question and, added the wrong label, something like that. I do think that there are machine learning methods to deal with that kind of thing, so that when you find that a particular observer who is still anonymous is consistently contributing points that disagree with your model output, maybe it's time to take a closer look at those points through some kind of a moderation process. But yes, that is definitely a risk.
The exact opposite's a problem as well. So you might be getting anonymous information that is correct, but you might be exposing a community at risk to some sort of retribution. So you might have a small community that might be next to a protected area, and they're deforesting so they could have some sort of livelihood. And as soon as that's tracked, something might happen to that community. So there's a whole bunch of thought put around. It's like, how do you collect that information? How do you still create the information needed to be compliant, but still set it up in a way where you're not putting folks at unnecessary risk? And there's a whole in the FDAP program. There's a whole conversation that's focused on how to actually address both those issues.
Thanks. I was curious for Nick and Jacob about looking at palm oil. Some of the data sets you referenced split up palm into industrial and smallholder and then year of detection as well. So I was curious, in your ideal worlds, are you creating like a binary layer for palm and not palm for 1 year? Are you looking at time series? Are you splitting up those classes into further classes? What is your dream end product of this?
Oh boy, that's a great question. A map of every palm tree in the world would be fantastic. We haven't gone into those nuances yet. Palm is palm, and probability of palm is probability of palm. Let me put it that way. And you know, that can mean different things in different places. Maybe it's just a cloudy pixel and the model's not very sure, or maybe it's fractional palm. And so, you know, from my perspective, it's best to hold on to that uncertainty for as long as possible and treat your eventual, you know, propagate that through to your eventual decision so that you have some understanding of, you know, the risk that's involved.
Yeah, I think Nick covered it there.
Other questions? Everyone's waiting for happy hour. Oh.
Yep.
All right. Anything else? Sorry, Remy.
If we have like another minute, just to come back to the question that was regarding the other regulations, just wanted to say the US Illegal Deforestation Act is out for consultation. The UK is probably going to issue its own regulation soon. Canada's going to do the same. So just on that topic that we didn't finish, I think those are coming.
Anything else you guys want to add? Comments? Closing remarks?
Me?
Yeah, you're elected.
You know, just thinking about like this challenge, right? And we've all been talking about this. There's a whole bunch of different components to it that are important, and we've been listening to them throughout this entire week. Whether it's how do you collect reference data, the need for collecting reference data, how do you distribute it? Then we had a whole other series of conversations focused about how do you actually build models themselves, all the different elements associated with it, and how do you get some of it commercialized, how do you get some of it non-commercialized, to your point. Then there was a whole set of questions and conversations built around generative AI and how this fits into that. And then there's the underlying question or conversation about the ethics and the durability of all these different efforts. And I think some of the stuff regarding this specific conversation encompasses all those different parts. So all those parts need to work well together for this to be effective. And that collaborative approach, that collaborative paradigm is going to be what I believe, or what several of us believe, is going to be the key to success of this thing. And I'm hoping that we're able to do it.
Yeah, just how much time do we have left?
You got 9 minutes.
Really?
So, yeah.
Wait, okay.
Sorry, you got 2 minutes.
All right, 2. No, I don't need 2 minutes. The only other point I wanted to make here was that I think there's a role for everyone here to play. And, you know, this is not just some academics locked in a room making maps and, you know, companies consuming them or something like that. It's going to have to be a communal effort, as Dave was saying, and that's going to include evaluating models, deploying them, gathering information in the field, building capacity within the field to understand what's happening and, you know, where the data is going and what it all means, and you know, just a whole range of activities, and everybody can, you know, have something to do there. So I think that's one of the messages that we'd really like to get across here, is that you know, there's something for everyone here, whether you're in industry or academia or governance. It's going to be a collaborative effort.
I'm going to just say something really quick, which is that the partnership that José mentioned before is extremely important in terms of kind of like very often we get stuck in a point that we cannot really go to a better resolution because we are not really working on this technology. And that's the moment when partnerships like that, like Digitais, Floresta, and Trase, is extremely important for us to get to the point that we couldn't before with their methodology. So it's also about transferring technology. It's also about transferring knowledge. And I think that's the reason why Geo4Good is such a special place, because that's the moment when we share these things with each other, when we make connections, and we really get to advance on these points. So I'm really grateful that we have this moment every year to really share and progress on that.
Awesome.
I will bother you to join with us.
All right. Well, if there's no other questions from the audience, thank you very much to the panel for spending your time and having a great discussion. So a big round of applause.